Well, hey, welcome to Jayhawk Wednesday. And just to kind of bring us into, I'm going a little less, out there with it, but Julie has made us some masks. So mine is Jayhawk Blue. So this is in honor of Jayhawk Wednesday. Um, Great question. Family discussion. I can't wait to do this after the coronavirus is over. It's okay to be honest. We all want this to be over. I can't wait to do this after the virus is over. Hey, just a heads up. On Monday, I talked about the significance of communion, um, to look back, to remember, to look forward that He's returning for us, and to look in. And there's also, I attached to it that we're going to put just that attachment for you, basically a tutorial on how to lead your family in communion. So we're not going to do it on the screen on Sunday morning or on Friday during our Good Friday presentation, but it'll be an opportunity for you as a family to participate in communion together. There's a tutorial. Donald will put that up on the web so that you can just go to that 3-4 minutes. Just give you a great suggestion on how to lead your family in communion. Hey, by the way, Sunday's coming. I'm wearing a tie. I always wear a tie on Easter. I'm wearing a tie, okay? So if you're in your pajamas, whatever your attire is, calling all men to put on a tie out there. Find your best clip on and put it on with your Fred Flintstone pajamas. What Jesus has done for us on the cross, that He's died, He was buried, He rose from the grave, not only saves us, but the resurrection, the gospel, it grows us up on a daily basis. It transforms us on a daily basis. So if that's the case, then we as believers ought to be experts at what the resurrection provides. We ought to be experts on how the cross of Christ demonstrates to a watching world all that Christ is capable of. Let me paint a scenario to you. We say that God is love. Well, but the world says, well, wait a minute. If God is love, why do we find ourselves in all the circumstances we find ourselves in? It's the old, why do bad things happen to good people question. If God is love, why does He allow tornadoes and hurricanes and wars? And why does He allow a coronavirus to literally shut down the planet? There's not a person that won't be affected some way, shape, or form by what this virus is causing. Well, if that's the case, then wait a minute. Why do we say God's love if He allows all these things? Well, God has done something about it. 2,000 years ago, He went to the cross to pay the ultimate penalty, to deliver us from death so we could spend eternity with Him. See, if God just kind of nurtured us through whatever calamity or saved us from each calamity, well, we would still end up dying. So the bigger issue is what He rescued us from. He rescued us from eternal separation from Him. So you go back to that question. Okay, we ought to be experts at the cross and all that the cross provides. Well, how do we know that God is love based upon what He has exemplified on the cross? Well, there's a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, we know that God is love because God demonstrates His love for us, and His love is demonstrated by the extent of how far He is willing to sacrifice on our behalf. So His love is demonstrated to the extent of how far He's willing to go for us. Let me show you Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. Listen to this. This is called the great kenosis. It means the great emptying of Jesus. He says this, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although He existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but He emptied Himself, taking the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Think about the extent that Jesus went to save us. Equal with God in the heavenlies. He was willing to give that up. He had this attitude in and of himself that he existed in the form of God, was with God, but emptied himself, squeezed himself into the life of humanity, born a baby, and was literally obedient to his Father to the point of death, even death on a cross. What an incredible distance he went to exemplify his love for us. Incredible picture. So how do we know he loves us? Well, you have to look at the extent that he went to sacrifice himself for us. He left the heavenlies, squeezed his life into humanity, was obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. But here's a second thing that demonstrates his love. How unworthy are we, the ones he died for? I want to show you something. I want to show you something in Romans chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. Many times we read verse 8, but we leave out verse 7. And again, this really demonstrates he was willing to die for us who were incredibly unworthy. Let me show you. Listen to what it says. Romans chapter 5, starting in verse 7. He says this, "For one will hardly die for a righteous man." In other words, who's going to die for a righteous man? Well, you might. Though perhaps for the good man, someone would dare even to die. Well, the chances that you die for somebody who's just good, well, they lessen. But get verse 8. But God demonstrates his own love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Think about what it's asking. Would you die for a righteous man? Would you die for somebody important? Somebody in the limelight? Well, possibly. Would you die for somebody who's good? Well, I don't know. It depends on who they are. And then who in their right mind would die for somebody who disregards you? Well, Jesus did that. In that while we were yet sinners, before we even knew who he was, he died for us. We were unworthy of him sacrificing himself for us. So here's the extent to a watching world. How do we know that God is love? Well, to the extent that he was willing to go demonstrates his love for us. But then also how unworthy we are. Here's a good project for you to do as a family. Sit around the table, talk about the question, or complete the sentence. God's love is like. Paint a picture. It'd be great discussion around the family. Just say, God's love, if you were to try to describe God's love to somebody who didn't know anything about God's love, how would you do it? God's love is like. And then brainstorm as a family. What would you come up with? Well, have a great Wednesday, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning.